All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to start our class here. Does anyone know if you drink moldy water, can that make you sick? I did that this morning. I didn't look at my water bottle before I drank out of it. I didn't look until after I swallowed, and then I was thinking, is this going to be bad? Okay. All right, well, if I start looking green up here, just let me know. I washed that this morning, though, and I put fresh water in there. But that's what's going on in my life. We are on our third commitment of gospel-centered marriage. We started this conversation last week. We're going to finish it today. We're talking about trust. The third commitment is this: we will work together to build a sturdy bond of trust. And we gave a somewhat lengthy definition for trust when we talk about trust in a marriage. It's being so convinced that you can rely on the integrity, strength, character, and faithfulness of another, that you are willing to place yourself in his or her care. That's trust, right? That's being able to put your neck out. That's being able to know that they are going to fulfill their end of the bargain and be good on their promises. Last week we looked at a trust test that had a bunch of questions on it, and we went through it question by question, and it was a great way to, if you answered it honestly, to kind of diagnose whether or not what level of trust you have in your marriage. This week we're going to continue to talk about trust. Last week was kind of negative, kind of doom and gloom, right? Because a lot of those questions kind of lead to negative conversation. But to start, how long, or what is the average length of a marriage, in our world? Like, how long do they typically last?
5 years.
5 years? Any other guesses? 15? I looked it up. Stats are fascinating things. The average length of a marriage in our country is 8 years. Now, as discouraging as that is, 20 years ago, it was 7. So we are trending in the right direction here, although slowly, and 8 is still kind of depressing, right? I remember when Alicia and I, in our heads, it was 7, right? They were like, if you can get past 7, then you're good. And when that happened in our marriage, it was like, all right, we did it. But then we realized, like, oh, we're just getting started with this thing. We got married. I was 19, and she was 18 when we got married. And so 7 years in, we were still babies. We were 26 and 25, and like, oh, we reached this huge milestone. Let me ask you maybe a more difficult question, but a thought-provoking one is, why don't they last very long? Why do you think? I look around this room and I see, I see a lot of people past the 7 mark in here. But as you look at the world and you see people go from relationship to relationship and marriage to marriage, and these marriages don't last very long. In fact, as they go, typically the second marriage is, if the first marriage was 8 years, the second marriage is 7 years, and then the time continues to go down from that. Why don't marriages last very long? Yeah, Monica?
says, you do you. It's all about you. And marriage has to be about the other person. And you're constantly looking to see what you can do for them instead of you. And sometimes you have to give up what you want for what they want.
Yeah.
And that's not what the world teaches.
No, no. I mean, what you just described there is selfishness, right? Like we are very selfish people by nature, and when you get into a relationship where you take a vow, right? I'm going to put the other person's needs above my own. It's difficult. It's really hard. David, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say marriage takes work, a lot of work.
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to what she was saying about, avoiding the selfishness. If you don't want to put forth that effort, well, it's so much easier just, it's too much work. I don't want to deal with it.
Marriage takes work. And the longer that you're in it, the more you realize the truth of that statement, right? At least for our 17 years of experience, I think that that's definitely true. Rob, you had your hand up.
Just like both have said, he just said it, easy. We've got a whole commercial series about the easy button.
Oh, yeah.
Push your easy button. When it's hard, you want the easy way out. So same thing goes for marriage. Push that easy button and fail. And the world tells us that's okay.
Absolutely. Diane?
One or the other breaks that trust, and it's hard to forgive that breaking of the trust.
Yeah.
And
When
so you just don't do it.
Yeah, when trust is broken. And I think we've all experienced that at some point in our marriage. As tragic and heartbreaking as that is, when you experience it, it's hard to move on. And especially if we're living in an environment, in a culture that says you do you, right? And so, well, you broke trust, you hurt my feelings, and so I'm done. Right? Sticking with it, it's hard. It's difficult. Rod, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think you look at how long people keep their job, it's probably about the same. I think all it comes down to boredom and the world telling you do better.
We're constantly looking at other people, right? And it's like, man, I wish I had their relationship, or I wish I had their stuff, or their job, or whatever they have, instead of counting your blessings and being grateful for what you have. Absolutely. Scott?
I'll say, we like things to be fair, so, marriage should be a 50-50.
Sure.
relationship, and-
That sounds great.
Yeah, it sounds like
It sounds
everybody
great.
pulls exactly 50%, do half the chores and stuff, when really marriage is about 100%. You have to give 100% or more.
Yeah.
And if both parties are doing that, and the second thing is, marriage, the only way a marriage can be successful is if God is the foundation of the relationship. I mean, there are marriages when people don't have God in their lives
Yeah.
succeed, but a successful marriage is going to have God as a foundation.
Absolutely.
If you have that, then you can build on that.
And you would think that us as Christians who want God in our lives and are following Jesus and trying to be godly and righteous, and what we do, we should have an advantage in this area. We should. It doesn't always work out that way. But I would say on the whole, it is much better than the alternative. But it's a beautiful thing when you see it. When a couple is completely at rest with one another, when trust is flowing back and forth between the two, when respect and affection are the language that they use to communicate with each other, where they negotiate through difficulties as if they were one person. It's a beautiful thing what happens in a marriage when trust grows and thrives. Unfortunately, that is not how my marriage started. I don't know if you could say the same for yours. But I made the cardinal mistake as Alicia and I began our life together. I took trust for granted. We loved each other, and we had already been through some really difficult things as teenagers when we were dating. If you know our story, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, well, then that's for another sermon, another day. I got to save some of my stories back. But we went through a lot as juniors and seniors in high school when we first started dating, and so we went through it. And so when we got married, our relationship really was, for me, it was comfortable. It was easy, right? I didn't really think about trust, but little did I know, my small day-to-day actions and some bigger betrayals on my behalf were eroding what little trust that we had. And I wasn't mean, I wasn't harsh or temperamental. If you know me, I'm a pretty easygoing guy. I've just always been that way. But I was selfish and immature, and Alicia was patient with me, as she always is. She knows in our relationship, if she wants me to do something, she knows that I have to be the one to want to do it. And so she'll plant little seeds as we go along, and then she harvests those sometimes years later and she'll say things like, "Oh, that is a great idea," when she had it the entire time along. So she was very patient with me. She was not going to declare war and respond in kind. But she was also unwilling to live in a relationship with someone she simply could not trust. And so change had to take place. And trust needed to be built back if our marriage was going to survive. And I'm happy to say that today, I believe we have a tremendous amount of trust. We have peace and unity. And while we might not have the perfect marriage, we have the resolve to make it through anything. But that didn't happen by accident. So let me ask you, how do you gain trust back when you've lost it? Has anyone ever had this conversation with their children? Right? I have. Of how do you've lost trust, that children are prone to do that. How do you gain it back? Any thoughts? Scott?
It takes a lot of time.
Time.
Yeah, we have a story too, but I won't get into that. But yeah, to gain trust back, it takes years of showing and demonstrating. There's love there, but there's always, in the back, just a little bit of a lack of total trust. But it does. It's just time and effort.
Time and effort. Anyone else?
A lot of prayer.
A lot of prayer. Casey? Change behavior. Yeah, making those changes, making it known, for sure. Anyone else? I remember having this conversation with my kids. It's like, well, why can't I do this? It's like, well, you burned me last time, and so I don't trust you. It's like, well, how do I gain back trust? It's like, well, there is no you have to do X, Y, and Z, and then boom, trust is built back. There is no magic pill or silver bullet when it comes to trust. It takes intentionality, it takes persistence, and the key ingredient, as Scott pointed out, is time. And the thing about time is there's no shortcuts with time. There's no easy ways with time. It's not like you can just kind of check out and then, oh man, I hope months and years have passed. No, it takes work and effort. Scott, what were you going to say?
You've probably run into this, but in the military we had a saying that one mistake can wipe out 1,000 attaboys.
Yeah.
And when you think of how long did it take to build up 1,000 good things.
Absolutely. And I mean, what an interesting parallel with what you just said to our spiritual lives too, right? Of we live in a very transactional society, right? Where we think if I do a good thing, then that cancels out a bad thing. No, it doesn't. I wish it were that. I wish it were that way. And actually, I don't. I don't wish it were that way because we would never be able to balance the books of our life. But if your marriage is going to be what God intended it to be, then trust must be built, maintained, and protected, and it also must be restored when it is broken. So let's start with this first part. Marriage's construction project. You need trust to enter into marriage. Unless you are living in a society where they have arranged marriages, in our culture here in America, you need trust, right? It doesn't make sense. You won't marry someone that you don't trust. At least you shouldn't, right? Like, it doesn't really make sense. For what you're going to be experiencing and going through life with, you need to be able to trust the other person. But truly, until you share everything, and like when you're dating someone, you have a certain level of trust. But I would say that level of trust pales in comparison to the amount of trust that you need in a successful and thriving marriage. Until you share everything, you just don't really know. Until you're sharing the same bed, you're sharing finances, you're sharing secrets. You're sharing clothes sometimes because, well, your hoodie is just more comfortable than mine. Or you're sharing toothbrushes. Don't do that. Don't do that. If you need a toothbrush, come see me. I'll hook you up. We got a stockpile of them in our linen closet at home.
Can we just stop? If you're
Okay.
to smooch each other, how come you can't?
It's just different, Krista. I can't explain it.
No,
Nobody touches my toothbrush, at least not that I know of.
I think that's when you know your marriage is strong.
I'm typically up before her, so she could very well be using my toothbrush and I would never know. I hope not. We're talking about trust today. Not today. So during the dating relationship, you're kind of on trust probation, right? How you act during the dating period is to show to show goodwill for the trust that you wish to someday enjoy together. Sadly, some people, when they get into marriage, they feel like they've been swindled in this area of the promises that they made, and then they couldn't deliver on those promises when they get into marriage. So when you start a marriage, you're starting a project together that will take both parties' full attention and full energy in order to build, and this project comes in steps. Rod, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say, sharing the toothbrush, that's where the trust comes in. You trust that they're not gonna use it to do something they're not supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen enough sitcoms in my life that, yeah, toothbrushes are good for cleaning other things than your teeth too. Hopefully not. For your spouse. When it comes to your siblings, that's like, it's different. It's just different, right? This project comes in steps. Step number 1, play it straight. Communication is the number 1 complaint I hear in couples counseling. Like, bar none, it is like, as soon as the first session that I sit down with a couple, if communication does not come up in the first session, I don't know where I'm at, because it's always been that way. Every single couple that I've sat down and talked to and counseled, they always say, well, we just don't communicate well. And really that is code for something else that's going on in the relationship. But that's the easy one, right? Because it's so obvious. Well, duh, you're in here, like you're sitting on the couch. I would imagine, communication is probably something that we need to work on. But then, you dig down deeper and you realize, oh, there's a reason why communication has broken down. For trust to be built, your spouse needs to be able to take your words at face value. Saying things either out loud or in your head like, did he really mean that? Or was she serious? Here's a question though, because we're not trying to change our spouses, we're here to change ourselves. How do you know if you are communicating effectively? How do you know? Because we can think that we're great communicators, but you might not be. Wes?
Unless you say fewer arguments.
What about arguments, Wes?
Fewer arguments.
If you have fewer arguments, perhaps.
If you're being honest and speaking clearly, my problem is I don't hear well much anymore.
Yeah. That is true. We're going to get to listening here in a second.
Yeah, so,
Any other cues into knowing if you're communicating well?
If it gets done.
If it actually gets done, right? Like, If you told your husband or your wife, like this needs to happen, or hey, make sure you pick up the kids from school, or whatever, then like, okay, information is at least being received and acted upon, for sure. What if you just asked? Have you ever thought about that? Asking your spouse, hey, do I communicate well? Am I a good communicator? What are some areas that I can be better at communicating? They might already have a list for you. But you never know until you ask, right? In Ephesians 4, verse 29, it says, Paul writes, "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth. Some hear this and believe that this verse is talking about foul, four-letter words that we have in our society today. And whereas this verse might cover that base, that's not the only thing that it's talking about. Corrupting talk is more than just four-letter words that we have decided mean certain bad things in our culture. For Paul, good communication starts in the heart. He says, "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, that it may give grace to those who hear." Good communication is other-focused. DJ?
I think it's important to qualify what good communication is. Natalie is great at telling me, like, communicating with me, telling me what she wants done or, like, her concerns. But our problem always runs into, like, her vocabulary that she uses means something different to me. So I often have no idea what she's talking about. Whereas I'm the opposite. I try to be very clear on what I'm talking about, but I don't always take the time to actually say it. And so I think you can communicate well, but in different aspects. If you're not on the same page, then it's still not good communication.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many ways and areas that communication can break down. Vocabulary is one of them. Distraction is another, that we can be very distracted. And I don't know if this describes your marriage, but at times, Alicia and I, we might be sitting in bed and we have our phones out, right? And like we're both equally distracted. But then one of us will put our phone down or put it to the side and say something, and there was no indication that the other should do the same. But one starts talking, and then on my end, she could be saying something, going into this long diatribe, 5 minutes long in length. I am meanwhile scrolling and could not tell you a single thing of what she was saying, because my hearing's bad. Wes, I was in the Air Force. You see, it's not that I was distracted, it's my hearing that is bad. Distraction's one of them, absolutely. And so I think DJ, in that specific instance, I think that like asking the questions, right, of like, do we communicate? Like, do we actually communicate well? Like, I know we think we do, but what are some areas that we can do better? And agreeing upon agreed upon vocabulary might be one area. Yeah.
It's so funny because, when our kids were little, we always said, "Look at me."
Yeah. Look at me. So I know that you're hearing me.
And they would understand it, and we don't do that with our spouses, but we should wait and say, pause and say,
Yeah.
I don't know the right way. Because then you would break that, whatever the other person's doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes she does say that. I mean, sometimes we do that. I mean,
And say, "Look at
it's
you."
not our situation.
And the other thing that's funny, we're all getting older and talking about the hearing. If I don't have my face, if it isn't eye to eye and I don't have my face facing right, he says he can't hear me because I talk softly.
Uh-huh.
If I'm like over here talking, and I'm talking to him, he goes, "I can't hear you." So it's that face to face.
Yeah.
Different variables to it.
Very good. And especially, I mean, like this will happen in our relationship when it's, because we know each other, of that we can be very distracted as to what we're talking about, of saying like, I need you to look at me. Okay, we need to communicate 100% here. There can't be a breakdown here because being a bad parent and not picking up the kid from soccer is going to affect us all here. So like, look at me. Cresta, did you have your hand up?
Well, I just think communication is far more than words, because this guy is
Oh.
all about words. It's not his thing, and that was a struggle for me because it is mine. And so at the beginning of our marriage, I wanted words out of his mouth, and it was all just sticking in here. So his body was going around and literally doing everything. The dishes, the baths, the blah, blah, whatever. And it was us learning to communicate via our love languages and accepting that, because once we figured that out, our household was pretty peaceful, because
Yeah.
I understood what he was doing, and he understood that I needed more verbal
Yeah.
out of him.
Zach will just raise an eyebrow and be like, whoa, whoa.
But it's, you have to understand each other
Message received.
and not expect, just like we can't just expect to sit there and have long conversations if that's not who you are. I don't know.
It's true.
You have to understand each other.
No, and love language definitely fits into this conversation because, I mean, the same as vocabulary, right? Like you guys might be
Actions as well.
speaking different languages
Yeah.
and through your action as well. You say something to your spouse, not because you want something from them, but because you want something for them. That's what Paul's talking about here, of using words that build up, not corrupting language. You want to build the other person up. And if that's the intent of the heart, then you're going to choose your words, your tone, your nonverbals very carefully. If your true intent is, I'm trying to build you up, then all of those things play a part. Rod?
Well, in the military, and when you're speaking to your children, it helps sometimes to say, repeat back to me what I just told you.
Sometimes you would think that that would be foolproof, right? They would just like, there's no way they would ever be able to forget this or not get it right. But those of us who have children, they prove us wrong all the time. But that is, I mean, yeah, repeat it back to me, write it down, all good words of advice. Step number 2 for building up trust. Be good for your word. Simply keep your promises that you make. We've talked about this before. We're going to talk about it again because it's so important. And this happens so often, and it's typically not, like I said, it's not the big promises out there. It's the small ones of just being able to be a person of your word. Keeping your promises over time will cultivate an environment where you can readily rely on each other, where you can stick your neck out, knowing that the other will come through on their end of the bargain. Step number 3, watch out for the other person. And you shouldn't read this in a negative tone, like, watch out for the other person. It's, no, watch out for the other person, right? Be genuine, heartfelt, and self-started interest in the other person is the seedbed for trust. When you know that someone is thinking about you regularly, when they're watching out for your welfare and are looking for ways to care for you, it can't help but breed trust and safety. But this is the problem when you hear things like, I'm just not on my husband's radar. Or, he doesn't even know that I'm around. Or, she's in her own little world there. Remember, the central call of the kingdom is love. We love God, we love other people. That's what we're here to do. And it's a call to live other-focused. And sometimes you get this right. You say things like, I'll go to the movie that she wants to go to. Or, I'll do what he wants to do, right? It's other-focused, watching out for the other person. Or, I'll opt for peace rather than doing anything I can to prove that I'm right, so that I can win the argument. That's the times when we get it right. There are many other times where we get this wrong, where we are tempted to say things like, I don't care how much she complains, I'm going golfing. Or, I know we can't really afford it, but I'm buying it anyways. or any time you might say out loud or in your head, I'm right. I'm right. You're wrong. Haha. Nana boo boo. Watch out for the other person. Number 4, keep short accounts. Ephesians 4, verses 26 and 27, it says, Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. This is a call to keep short accounts. How does holding on to your anger give the devil an opportunity? Because that's how that passage ends. Typically, we just stop at the, do not let the sun go down in your anger. We know that one. And I think a lot of us that have been in marriage and have read the Bible, it's just like, that is just like communicated in any type of marriage setting, class, seminar, whatever it is. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Cool. But he tells you why, and give no opportunity to the devil. How does holding on to your anger give the devil an opportunity? Wes?
At some point, it becomes, there's something better out there, which is not good.
No. Absolutely. And I think there's a process to that, right? And we've all been in arguments with our spouses, and as you feel you're heated, you're defensive, right? In that moment, and as you carry the offense around with you, it tends to grow in size and magnitude. How dare they? Yeah, Tina?
Oh, I just said it fuels resentment.
Yes. Resentment. Can you resent someone that can you trust someone that you resent?
After a while, no.
No. It works against it, right? And as it grows in size and magnitude, your hurt and anger grow with it, right? If you've ever been there, just like, it's like this never-ending cycle, just like you're ramping up, right? You get hot, you begin to rehearse the things that you want to say to that other person. Oh, I can't wait till we talk again. I got it perfectly laid out here. My argument is airtight. You cannot argue with this because logic is on my side. And you imagine life without the complications that the other person brings. And thus, the seed of divorce is planted. Wes, what were you going to say?
I had a friend who told me one time that his parents argued a lot. And whenever his dad apparently won the argument, his hair would fall out. And he couldn't figure out what was going on, why. And then he later found out that his wife was putting hair in the shampoo.
No. When he won the argument?
Well, because he was a cross-view man, but, yeah.
That's an interesting story, Wes. Ann?
I like that, the other word for, and do not give the devil an opportunity, do not give the devil a place. And it's like, to my mind, I think about setting a place at the table for him. And when we sit, and if he has a place at the table, then he's like a regular, he's a regular part of the family.
Yeah,
We don't want to set that place for him.
absolutely.
We want him in that firm.
That's kind of an interesting illustration you just painted there, Ann, in that how typically we think, the Christian mindset, marriage takes 3, right? We need, God involved in that marriage. But couldn't we just as easily make the devil a part of our marriage too? And if we give him a seat at the table or give him an opportunity to come in, and Jesus says that he's here to steal, kill, and destroy. And when you let him into the marriage, he's going to do exactly that. Tina.
Just that whole phrase, winning the argument, to me, that's the devil right there. It's not a competition.
It's the devil.
It's not a competition. When we were first married, it was a competition for him. And, so there was that back and forth. It's like, okay, it's not a competition. We're just trying to get something figured out here. There's no you win, I actually
Yeah.
lose. And it took time for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Working on that one.
Yeah. Well, I know Alicia and I have been in that because I'm a very logical thinking person. That's where my mind goes, is I want to win because, like this is truth and facts, and I can look up stats that are on my side. I'm very good at this. But they're typically never delivered because then okay, this is getting a little out of hand. This is getting ridiculous. But if you think about that of winning the argument, right? Is it really winning if you feel like, okay, like she can't argue back with me, but she's sitting there crying on the floor? Like, is that winning? Do you feel like you just won there? You might have won personally, but the relationship has lost big time. And so keeping short accounts, incredibly meaningful and needed for your marriage to work. And so that is how you build trust, right? Another aspect of trust is it needs to be protected. Homeland security. Trust is not only needs to be built, it needs to be protected. And how do you protect trust that you already have? 2 simple steps. Step number 1, it's not even on the slide. It's just, you can just keep this in your head. Step number 1, how do you protect trust? Talk, talk, talk. You have to communicate. And then it's not just logistics and schedules, talking about hopes and dreams and fears, talking about spiritual matters, having a Bible study with your spouse. I mean, how wonderful would that be if you can find the time to do it? Talking about boundaries, talking about your sexual relationship. Many people don't want to talk about that, even with the person that you would say you trust the most. Talking about sexual things are just kind of off the table because it's like, well, that's kind of an uncomfortable thing to talk about. Well, you need to talk about it. And it's not just subject matter, it's finding the best times and places to talk, because 2 sinners living in silence will not produce unity, understanding, and love. It just won't happen. And step number 1 is talk, talk, talk. Step number 2 is listen, listen, listen. Active listening, actually being curious, asking questions, follow-up questions and clarifying questions, being curious about what your spouse is trying to communicate. I mean, have you ever taken notes while you're in a conversation with your spouse? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Give it a shot. I mean, that communicates investment, right? Like, I am very concerned, and I want to be considerate to what you are saying to me. Consider your body language. What are the nonverbals you are using? Turn off the distractions, and if they can't be turned off, because sometimes distractions can't, right? Like you're engaged in something, communicate that it's a bad time. Return to the conversation later. Remember, make good on your promises. And there's a secret step number 3 in here too for how to protect the trust and security that you currently have, and that is pray, pray, pray. Pray for your spouse. Pray for your relationship together. Pray that you would be better. And pray for God's guidance and patience. Talk, talk, talk. Listen, listen, listen. Pray, pray, pray. That's how you protect the trust that you have. And what do you do when trust is broken? Like I said, there is no magic pill or silver bullet, but I do have some ideas of what you might try in your relationship if you have broken trust. Here's the deal. People are messy. That's what we say in counseling. People are messy, and we are, right? Our lives are full of difficulties and hurts and failures that we just keep inside, and then when they come out, they manifest themselves in very different ways, and sometimes they can be very hurtful to the people around us. People are messy, and when 2 messy people trying to live together in harmony come together, that has the potential to be a disaster. It doesn't have to be that way. Here are some vital steps for restoring trust. Number 1, admit your need. Self-deception is a real problem that we as human beings struggle with. We just, in our sermon series, we've been looking at 1 John, and in 1 John 1:8, it says, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. think there's a slight adjustment that we could make that fits our occasion here. If we say we have a perfect marriage, we deceive ourselves. Many couples seem committed to protecting the reputation of the marriage outside the home than they do about dealing with real brokenness that is being experienced. They think, no, as long as we tell ourselves, no, we're good, it's fine, that would actually be true, and it's not. They think that if they just believe they have a good marriage, then that will be the truth. But what really happens is that erosion takes place, trust erodes away, and the marriage dies from the inside out. If you don't trust your spouse, start the conversation. Number 2 is get help. If trust is broken, then you need to reach outside your marriage for help. Why? Because it's logical, right? Because you don't trust the other person enough to work together. Find someone who will hold you accountable for commitment and change, someone who will help negotiate, and someone who can provide objective feedback into your life and your marriage. Number 3, don't give up. If trust has been broken, it is very easy to think that things will never get better. You will be tempted to just cut and run. But these are Satan's lies, and they should not be believed. Number 4, stick your neck out. At some point, you will have to be willing to take a risk again. Remember, trust, the definition that we're going off of, is being so convinced of the other's character that you are willing to place yourself in his or her care. Some people come into counseling, and one of the problems is that trust has been broken, and even though one of the spouses might be doing all that they can to rebuild that trust, one is simply withholding. So I will not risk again. And if trust is needed in a marriage for it to survive, then you're going to have to risk at some point. In order for there to be trust, you have to be willing to give them opportunities to be trustworthy. Margaret.
I think one thing that we can do is to make sure that we are not wrong. We are not in the wrong. Sometimes we just are selfish and want to be the winner. So we need to be very sure that we are not in the wrong.
Yeah. Examine yourselves, right? Have that self-examination to fight against that self-deception that is so easily brings into our marriage. Absolutely. And number 5, get back up again. The trust building back process is not perfect, and there will be hiccups, and there will be speed bumps along the way because we're messy. But get back up. Address the failure with honesty and grace, and continue to do the things to restore trust. Trust is a beautiful thing when it is the glue that holds a husband and wife together. That's beautiful. That's what we strive for. It's what we want. But it's also an extremely sad thing when it's what keeps them apart. In your marriages, do not be willing to live with shattered trust, because our God is in the business of restoration and is ready and able to help you. So vitally important. And when we talk about 6 gospel commitments every couple needs to make, what one could possibly be more important than that? Of being committed to building trust and restoring trust when it's been broken. We're going to move on to our 4th commitment next week. No, we're not. Next week, is Christmas Day, and there's no Bible classes on next Sunday. So it'll resume, what is that? The 31st? The 1st? The 1st of January. Thank you very much for your attention and your comments and questions. We're going to end with a prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time that we can look into your word and discuss these things that are so important. God, please be with the marriages that are taking place in this congregation here. There's so many of them, and not all of them are represented in this room. But regardless of where we are at this morning, we all need your help. We need your help and your guidance, your patience, if our marriages are going to last and not just survive, but thrive. God, please help us to be the kind of spouses that we need to be. Help us to be patient with each other. Help us to communicate at a high level, and help us to want the things that we need in order to have a good relationship and a good marriage. God, please be with us now as we enter into this time of worship. God, help us to force out all of the distractions out of our minds and to focus on what we are doing and who you are. God, we love you so very much. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen.